Alrighty, welcome to the three of you. You all know me, I'm Bijan, but for those watching the recording of this, I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm Bijan, I'm a third year EEB and ENVS Earth double major, go by he, him pronouns, and I'm a third year, I think I already said that, and today I'm going to be presenting about food deserts. So this is part 3 of the 4-part webinar series on food issues. So far, we've covered food waste and food insecurity. Next week, we'll be talking about food waste, food insecurity, and food deserts as they relate to UCSC and Santa Cruz. So that's going to be a really good one, so stay tuned for that. And I decided to do this webinar series on food issues in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and economic depression that has exacerbated food insecurity nationwide. This presentation is recorded and all the recordings are available on my Instagram at Ashtiani-Eisemann. And the first two recordings are already up, so you can watch those. This presentation will be like slides, some videos, discussion questions, and then also at the end, you'll have a chance to like ask any questions that come up throughout the presentation. Unfortunately, there is no guest speaker this week. I reached out to a handful of potential guest speakers, didn't hear back, or they were unavailable, or they felt their expertise did not match. But no matter, we have a bunch of awesome videos to make up for that. And just to check in with everyone, if you can share your name, your pronouns if you're comfortable, your year, majors, and then just answer like the question today, which is like, what do you hope to learn today? And if anyone wants to start off and then just sort of popcorn to the next person.
Okay, I can go first. I'm Anna. I'm a third year human bio major with she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm just hoping to learn everything. I don't know much about this topic, but I'm excited to learn.
Oh, and then could you pass it to the other two?
Oh, okay. Zoe or Lisette, whichever one.
Yeah, I can go. Hi, I'm Zoe. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a second year environmental studies and politics double major. I only have a relatively basic knowledge about food deserts, so I like to know like more specifics and just like more detail in regards to food deserts. And I'll pass it to Lizette.
Oh, that was not my, I only turned on my camera. Okay. My name's Lisette. I'm a third year environmental studies and politics major. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm interested to learn about this because where I live in LA has a pretty big issue with food deserts, but I don't actually know that much about it other than it is an issue.
Awesome. And then I guess what I hope to learn is, I guess, to hear more from you three during our like discussion question sections, which you're not forced to speak. You can talk if you want, or you can type in the chat and you can, yeah. So yeah, we'll get into the topic for today. So food deserts. So I know some of you said you're not sure like what food deserts are, maybe have a vague understanding. So who knows like what a food desert is, just like generally? And you can unmute yourself or type in the chat. And Zoe, if you could help me read out the chat, I still can't see those, so.
Doesn't it have to do with the a lack of like good quality restaurants or grocery stores? I know that there's something about fast food, and then I also know there's something that's called a food apartheid, but I don't know the difference between.
Yeah, we're gonna get into food apartheid and how it differs from the term food deserts. But yeah, generally that's what it is. So let me get to the next slide. And so food apartheid, which we're gonna get into later, I've sort of crossed out food deserts because food apartheid is the more like emerging term that like better describes the conditions of like what food deserts are. So This map illustrates the concentration of food deserts where large numbers of people don't have access to fresh food. The USDA considers low-income households more than a mile from a supermarket and 10 miles in rural areas, and without access to a car to be in a food desert, often with only convenience store junk food for nourishment. 23.5 million people live in food deserts in the US, where they have limited access to healthy, fresh, and affordable food. And this map shows the concentration of those households in Appalachia, which is, if you can see my mouse, along here, the Deep South, and on Native American reservations. So this, I guess, the first set of discussion questions. So what kinds of challenges do people with low food access face? So, and also what are the consequences of low food access? So this could be just the distance from like a supermarket or a farmer's market or wherever they get, fresh food, nutritional food, like maybe they have to take several buses or like, so what kind of like challenges do people face with low food access?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of already like highlighted it, but I mean, if there's only, like 7-Elevens around and not really a place where people can get fresh produce, then they might not have as healthy of a diet, which can lead to health issues. And then, yeah, also like what you mentioned, if it's super far from a supermarket, people are going to have to spend a lot more gas money, which they may not even be able to afford in the first place. And that kind of, goes back full circle.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyone else? And if not, that's okay. We're going to get into it right now with a video. So it's the first one. It's only about 3.5 minutes, but it sort of explains what it is and tells us sort of a little story of how this woman has to get food and how far she has to travel to get it.
Got the bag.
This is Toni Lawson. She lives in the southeast part of Washington, D.C., a predominantly poor neighborhood.
I got the bag.
Your bag?
Yeah, the shopping
You
bag.
want to go grab it?
Yeah, because I don't have any money to buy bags.
Okay.
If, like Toni, you live in a lower-income community, have no access to a vehicle, and live more than a half a mile away from the grocery store, you live in a food desert.
Try not to miss the bus.
Toni retired from a career in the insurance industry 10 years ago and receives food stamps on the 6th of every month.
I don't think this was an accident, not to build grocery stores in this area because the people here, it's not just about black people, it's about poor people.
Route A4, destination.
Toni is one of more than 23.5 million Americans who live in a neighborhood which the USDA calls a food desert. That means they have limited access to healthy, fresh, and affordable food. For Toni, getting groceries requires traveling 2 miles with the help of 2 buses. It takes 40 minutes each way. It's a struggle to get there, especially when you're 71 and have to carry a week's worth of groceries back home without a car. In Washington, more than 80% of food deserts are located in the neighborhoods with the highest poverty rates, and where mostly black residents live. In whiter and wealthier parts of town, there are plenty of big box grocery stores and independently owned supermarkets. But in Southeast DC, leading chains don't feel like there's enough money to be made in those poorer neighborhoods. The higher rate of crime in Southeast is another deterrent. So if you want to buy food in Southeast DC, you generally have to get fast food or go to a convenience store. That leaves 150,000 people in the area in a food desert.
Now we're calling it what it is, food apartheid. It's something that's planned. A desert is natural. It's manufactured by the planet. This is something that's planned. And it's obvious.
Toni buys her food from multiple grocery stores, searching for the best deals. Here she is at Giant, her closest grocery store, trying to find some staples on sale.
There are not a lot of places in the area where I live that I can go and buy food. What I do is get my bulk when I get my stamps. I run all over the city. Even though the Giant is here, I don't patronize the Giant very often because it's expensive. So I'm running all over the city.
Tony is tired of traveling across the city hunting for food. She wants more healthy food options for everyone in the neighborhood. So she's training to be a community advocate, pressing the DC government to provide incentives that will attract more grocery stores to come here. Her goal is simple.
I've been in Ward 8 21 years, and we have not had a full-service supermarket for that entire time. There's always been a break. In my area, I want to see more places for people to shop.
For NPR, I'm Sasha Ann Simons in Washington.
Okay, there we go. So as you heard her talk about in that video, food desert, when we talk about low food access using that term, it can often imply that there's like some sort of natural, reason for why people have low food access. But as she said, like there's like human planning behind this, and it's on purpose, and it's not by mistake. And so food apartheid is an emerging term that more effectively describes the deliberate historical racialization of our food system through destructive policies that have stripped Black communities of their own self-determination and have catered to wealthy white Americans who essentially own and operate our current food system. Food apartheid differs from the term food deserts in that it looks critically at the intentional causes of inequity in our food system, such as racist and classist policies like redlining and low Black land ownership due to slavery that have produced worse health outcomes associated with poor food quality due to low food access. A food desert, while not technically wrong in its definition of what a food scarce area is, doesn't ask the question of why it is that way and who created the system. And those two things are crucial to bring to the forefront solutions that address the root cause of low food access. And I mentioned already that like food desert often implies a natural cause as opposed to the deliberate actions taken by decision makers that have racially divided society into two tiers of food access. Additionally, the simplified solutions that are sometimes proposed when using the term food deserts usually do not address the root causes of them. Simply opening up a chain grocery store in a low-income Black neighborhood doesn't empower Black people to be self-sufficient and to own their own means by which to live and thrive. Real solutions to food apartheid eliminate the need to rely on racially discriminatory institutions or practices to cater to the needs of people in food deserts. And to explain this more, we're going to watch the next video, which is also around 3.5 minutes. Malik Yakini from the Center for Nutrition Studies is going to explain the concept of food apartheid over food deserts in this next video.
I grew up in the city of Detroit in the 1960s. And while I was growing up, there were lots of folks here in the city who had moved to Detroit from the South beginning in the 1920s, including my grandparents on both sides. There were grocery stores almost everywhere in the city. There was a national chain grocer within walking distance of every location inside the city of Detroit. That all changed by 2007 when Farmer Jack, the last of those national chain groceries, closed its doors and Detroit became labeled as a food desert. The USDA defines a food desert as a low-income census tract where a substantial number or share of residents has low access to supermarket or local grocery stores. There's multiple problems with the term food desert. One of the problems is that typically people think of a desert as a very barren landscape, and the reality is that a desert is actually a very vibrant ecosystem. Another problem with the definitions used of food deserts is that it presupposes that the answer to these areas that lack access to healthy food is more grocery stores. A third problem with the term food deserts is it's not a term that people living in those areas use to describe their own situation. It's similar to the term at-risk child used in schools. I was a school principal for several years and never heard a parent come to me and say, "This is my son John, he's an at-risk child." This is a term which is imposed upon communities as opposed to a term that community members use to define their own condition. The fourth and perhaps most problematic issue with the term food desert is that it doesn't speak to the intentionality of the conditions that exist in communities that have low access to healthy foods. The reality is that public policy and economic practices have created these areas that have low access to foods, and food desert does not speak to that intentionality. Recently, the term food apartheid has resonated with myself and other food activists. Dara Cooper defines food apartheid as the systemic destruction of Black self-determination to control our food, including land, resource theft, and discrimination. A hypersaturation of destructive foods and predatory marketing, and a blatantly discriminatory corporate-controlled food system that results in our communities suffering from some of the highest rates of heart disease and diabetes of all times. Many tend to use the term food desert. However, food apartheid, according to Dar, is a much more accurate representation of the structural, racialized inequities perpetuated through our current food system. Whatever term we use to describe the situation, there are vast inequities in the American food system that are caused by historical, intentional, racist, and classist policies, resulting in far too many Black and brown and poor white people not having sufficient access to fresh, healthy, high nutrient dense, affordable food. I join with those who say that such access is a human right and that denying that right in one of the wealthiest nations in the world is unconscionable. I grew up in the city of Detroit in the 1960s.
Okay. So hearing from him and also talking about a little bit, next we're gonna ask a couple questions about food access and how difficult it is for you or anyone you know to get nutritious food. And this could also apply due to the new conditions of COVID, or maybe just a student living off campus. You might not have a car, and there are areas downtown and even on campus that are considered by the USDA as food deserts. So you might have to take several buses to get to a grocery store that might take, 30, 40 minutes, or maybe you just don't have the financial resources to buy enough healthy food, and maybe more like fast food or processed food is more readily and available to you and cheaper for you to buy than fresh food. I know my personal experience going to the farmer's market, I sort of expected when I first went there that it would be a lot cheaper, because farmers aren't selling to distributors who then sell to grocers who then sell to you. It's more direct, the farmers bringing their crops and selling directly to you, but the prices are a lot higher. So that sort of excludes a lot of people who, the intention of a farmer's market is to bring fresh produce and make it more affordable and accessible to everyone, but often that isn't the case. But yeah, I want to hear from you three answering either one of these questions. Do you or anyone you know live in an area without access to healthy, affordable food, and how difficult is it for you or anyone you know to get nutritious food?
Well, I can go first. I live pretty close to Trader Joe's. It's just like a 10-minute walk, and that was one of the big things I wanted when moving off campus, was to live somewhere near a grocery store and not have to make a 30-minute bus ride to one. But I know there are people in Santa Cruz that it does take them that long to get groceries. I was also wondering about the farmers market thing, because I was expecting the prices to be cheaper, but they were a lot higher. I know some farmers markets are cheaper, but yeah, I don't know why. Did you know why they were so high?
I don't. I suspect maybe it's just the transport costs, since they're bringing all of that themselves every week, and they have to set up like, or as opposed to like if they just sell it to someone, then they handle like stacking it up, presenting it, selling it, that kind of stuff. So maybe that's part of it, but that's not something that's like unique to this farmer's market. And also like a lot of farms are close by in Santa Cruz. We kind of like live by an agricultural area. So
Yeah.
I'm actually not sure what's the reason behind it, but yeah. It's possible that more like affluent people have ended up like, I don't know, going there and like buying more expensive stuff, and maybe they're like, oh, we can get away with these prices. I'm honestly not very sure like what's the reasoning behind it, but yeah.
I guess I can go. So yeah, I mean, y'all talked about Santa Cruz. I used to go to UC Riverside. And so right by Riverside is a city called Moreno Valley, which a lot of it is considered to be an area that has very, very few grocery stores. And also the public transportation isn't great either, which causes even more problems. So I know a couple people who either live there currently or are from there who have told me their struggles, like growing up, of like having to get in a car and drive like 45 minutes to the nearest grocery store, which is crazy to me. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, public transportation is something that like, you know, it might be there, but it's not very time efficient, or, you know, like, because like trying to get just to Capitola like by bus takes like an hour and a half or an hour. So it's like, even though there's public transportation, it isn't, you know, invested in enough to like make it like on par with like just going by car. So yeah.
Yeah, and like taking into account like doing school or working all week and then having to get groceries, and that being a 2 hour, you know, a 2 hour excursion, I guess. And
Yeah.
in the first video that you showed, the woman was 71 years old and she was like doing this at night. Like, that's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like I definitely took it for granted, like since I don't have a car, like when I would go down to like Safeway or wherever downtown to get groceries, and I'd have to like carry, if I had to like carry those bags like with me in the bus and like walk up to campus, like I was over at a friend's and I had to like carry those back from like their apartment to ours, and I was like, oh my God, this is horrible. Like, so yeah. Anyway.
When I lived on campus, it was definitely harder because you have to like take the bus, and the whole Safeway, getting to Safeway is an ordeal on the 15. But I have a lot of food allergies, so I would often have to go over to the river to Staff of Life because they sell like non-dairy products that you can't really get at Safeway or even Trader Joe's, and things that are like confirmed non-dairy and other like things that I eat that aren't sold in conventional grocery stores, and that is an ordeal having to get to Staff of Life because you have to take a bus to the metro station and then take another bus that only comes every 30 minutes. I don't even know what bus that is anymore. But now that I live with my parents, I have a car, and we live in a pretty wealthy part of LA, so it's not really an issue. So I will be very lucky next year when I have my car and I can make the 15-minute drive. Yeah, so I'm very lucky in that respect.
Yeah, you brought up another point, like what if someone, like yours is dietary restrictions, but just thinking of like COVID, like what if someone has some respiratory illness or like some other pre-existing condition that puts them at a higher risk for COVID? And then a lot of like large grocery stores, like they can't even go in there because, you know, they can catch COVID and get really sick. So like that sort of eliminates a lot of their options of where they can go. And if they don't have someone else who can do that for them, then it's like a lot harder to get, you know, nutritious food and stuff. So, but yeah, so next we're going to talk a little about, we talked earlier about sort of like what are the consequences, but now we're going to sort of talk about like some of the health consequences of not getting like enough nutritious food, and like how how the USDA defines a food desert, like how those characteristics are related to like other like health issues. So let me go here. So these graphs, so they all show different things. The one in the top left are low-income households more than 1 mile from a grocery store. And first thing to notice for actually all of these graphs is they all have concentrations in the same areas. So in Appalachian Mountains, the Deep South, and also Native American reservations are like the most notable ones. So yeah, low-income households more than 1 mile from the grocery store. Car-free households more than 1 mile from the grocery store. You can see the same areas are have high concentrations. And then you can see these two things, which are the characteristics of what the USDA defines as a food desert, and then health indicators like obesity and diabetes. And you can see in these exact same areas, Deep South, Appalachia, Native American reservations, there's high rates of obesity and diabetes. Because in a food desert or in food apartheid, the system's set up where that, companies for like junk food, processed food, fast food, they're targeting you because you don't have the financial means to buy nutritional food or produce, or to be able to go 3 miles by like several buses for like 40 minutes there and back to get fresh produce. But when right on the corner there's fast food, there's a corner store, there's a 7-Eleven, there's stuff like that that you can go to, and a lot of that stuff is more readily available to people. And so that's why we see higher rates of these health indicators like obesity and diabetes. And then this map shows the median household income for counties in the United States from 2013 to 2017. The lighter green colors are incomes less than 40,000. And again, you can see the same exact areas. So all these things are related: income to access to food. And then we talked about how food apartheid is that our food system is deliberately racialized through like historical policies like redlining. So you can see in the South, these areas that we saw on those maps, it's mostly Black communities and neighborhoods that are impacted by this. So next, we are going to watch this video by The Guardian. Just a quick sort of synopsis before we start it. In the food deserts of Memphis, Tennessee, dominated by fast food outlets and convenience stores, locals lack what seems a basic human right in the richer half of the city, supermarket. With a big gap in life expectancy, are these Americans doomed to die younger than their neighbors, or can they fight for their right to nutrition? And it's about 13 minutes long, so we'll start.
Right now, there are 23.5 million Americans who live in what we call food deserts.
We wanted to come up with priorities. What were the needs in the larger South Memphis area? And one thing that came up over and over again was access to food.
You can easily get to a McDonald's and there's food on every block. It's just not high quality food. We blame the individual for so long, and it's not the individual's fault.
There's a lot of money in Memphis, and there's a lot of poverty. You know, we have parts of South Memphis where whole streets and blocks are just vacant. It's like a war that people left due to some catastrophe, but it was just white flight and sprawl. And so what used to be a small family-owned grocery store is now a vacant building, and on one end of it, they have a liquor store that's typical of South and North Memphis. Nobody is going to be attracted in terms of grocery stores, retail, to an area that is sparsely populated and looks and feels dangerous. So a food desert, by basic definition, is a place where the majority of residents don't have access to what we call a supermarket, and a large percentage of the residents don't have transportation. From our office in South Memphis, our closest supermarkets are 2.3 miles and 2.5 miles away, respectively, and 1/3 of our residents don't have access to an automobile.
My name is Dolores Bayman. I have 5 children. I stay in South Memphis. I work for an elementary school as a janitor. A couple of years ago, it was a grocery store right up here across the street, but it's been shut down for over 10 years now. It's just an empty building. Without transportation, I have to call and ask someone to come and take me to the grocery store, or maybe catch a bus, and it takes like 45 minutes to an hour just to get to the grocery store. So when I go to the grocery store, this is some of the basic food that I buy. I buy lasagna, spaghetti, rice, their noodles. I have our canned vegetables, the basic meats. Right here, chicken, pork chops. I buy neck bones, turkey necks, basic food. And over here, I have their kind of quick food. We have corn dogs, burritos, things like that. When I go to the convenience store, it's not much I can feed them there. I have to feed them like something quick they're not gonna get full off of. But if I go to the grocery store, I get a chance to cook a full course meal.
Hey, how are you? This is a typical Memphis convenience store. They have a little produce, which I'm proud. They have some potatoes and onions. But if you notice right behind, there are sodas. 2-liter sodas and snack foods. So cookies and chips and candy and Kool-Aid, whole aisles of chips. Even more soda, sugary American breakfast foods, cereals, mechanically separated chicken, which is already kind of scary sounding, contains 2% or less of beef, pork, and so those are the type of ingredients that you're getting. This is pretty typical of what people have access to just walking up in their neighborhood. So the ingredients in grape drink, I don't know what anything is other than water. So.
My name is Shell Williams. I live in South Memphis. I've been here all my life. They used to have a grocery store in the South Memphis, but now they don't. So I had to go to the bus stop, and I had to wait on the 4-walker, and I ride it to the North Terminal, and then I transfer to a 2. The journey to the grocery store takes, I'll say, an hour and a half if the bus come on time. When I go to the grocery store, I get everything that I needed. Having to take 2 buses is stressful and it's frustrating, but I still had to go, to have food in the house.
East Memphis is a majority white, upper middle class and wealthy area. Affluent people who own multiple automobiles have choices and much access to fresh food. And so we're in a parking lot of a well-known brand, Whole Foods. And across the street, there's a national grocery store chain. That same chain has a very upscale store on the other side of the movie theater. And just a mile and a half away is a Sprouts grocery store. Not even a mile east of here is a fresh market. This is very different from the experience of Memphians 4 or 5 miles north of here, 6 miles southwest of here in South Memphis, in the most distressed neighborhoods.
The irony is that as integration of neighborhoods became more prevalent, a lot of folks moved out of those neighborhoods. The people that remained in these, what we now have as food deserts, are people that simply did not have the resources to move. The challenges are multiple. When grocery store operators look at can they make money, the answer from their perspective is possibly, but probably not. So this site is one of the sites that we identified as a potential location for a grocery store in South City. This probably would have been the most ideal site for a grocery store operator. The property was on the market. It was at a price point, frankly, that was just above our ability to pay, as well as try to provide incentives to the grocery store operator to make it an economically viable opportunity. So over time, it has now been acquired by one of our local craft brewery companies, and they're building a brewery that hopefully will provide some jobs for the residents, where it will help them from an economic standpoint. And it'll be a great addition to the city, but unfortunately, it won't be available for a grocery store.
Redlining is a federal policy from the 1930s. The Federal Housing Administration and policymakers decided to work with the lending institutions to draw maps to talk about where it was best to lend their money for residential mortgages. They talked about the high-risk areas where they did not want to make investments because the chance of them being repaid were low. And those areas and cities looked like areas where moderate and poor people lived and where Black and minorities lived. When banks won't make investments in residential mortgages, they also don't make investments in small businesses. The sad part is that this redlining map is almost identical to how lenders make residential mortgages in 2019.
Can you help me find all of the grains or starches in this? I was trained to educate families on healthy eating. Common health issues we see with our patients range from pre-diabetes to full-blown type 2 diabetes to hypertension to elevated blood pressure. These are things that we commonly were thinking of with your middle-aged parents or even grandparents, and now we're seeing them in children that are 8, 9, and 10 in 4th grade and middle school. Zucchini, that's a weird word. Zucchini?
Sounds like bikini.
Bikini? Yeah, that's what we're chopping today.
Every corner you turn, there's always a fast food restaurant, but if we can get more restaurants in our city where you can eat healthy food, especially in certain communities and certain areas, we would actually love that.
We We blame the individual for so long, and we have to start seeing that that's not working. It's not the individual's fault. It is our entire environment, and we're not going to see changes in health until we go out into the community and create change.
South Memphis Farmers Market is in its 10th season. It came about because of a neighborhood plan called the South Memphis Revitalization Action Plan. We wanted to come up with priorities. What were the needs in the neighborhood? And one thing that came up over and over again was access to food.
I'm one of the seniors that over the years, things have just moved away from us. So when Works brought this to us, this was a godsend. We should have more of these. I'm loving it.
The gatekeeper of income, Lord Poverty, house of my home is a fear giant in the seven kingdoms. The next time my dad gotta pay for our food with stamp show mouths, better stay shut. Your eyes better stay glued to your grocery bag, to the woman who said my cousin was a burden, to the man who said my EBT card is an eyesore, as if this American flag looking at me ain't enough. Imagine.
All right. So we have another question, sort of similar to the other ones we've already talked about, but more focused on COVID and its impact on food access. So COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted low-income Black and Brown communities who live in areas of food apartheid because of an association with higher rates of obesity and diabetes, both of which are at-risk groups to COVID. In addition, joblessness and lack of government aid has left many households without enough money for healthy food. So with these things in context, how has COVID impacted your area with regards to food?
Well, being in Santa Cruz and also back home near Sacramento, it hasn't really impacted my area because I live in a pretty wealthy, both towns are pretty wealthy, but I can't imagine like the areas that we saw in the video, like those, what the impact that COVID has had on those communities, being, it was already difficult to access food. But yeah.
Yeah, and think of all of like the small business like grocery stores or restaurants that have closed down. Like a ton of like restaurants, even I mean Pacific Avenue is not really like the places we're talking about, but I just remember when I was walking down there, like there were so many new stores and so many stores that had like left, and that I'm sure that's not like just exclusive to Santa Cruz. I'm sure all over the country, like small businesses have closed, and small, grocery stores or other stuff like that. That's probably also made it harder for people to, like as that woman said in the video, people who have lived there a long time, they're like, there's never been like a permanent grocery store or place that they can go to. It's always things like closing down or opening up for a limited amount of time and then closing down again. And COVID-19 has had like a huge impact on businesses who haven't received any federal aid.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, something in regards to back at home. So directly like where I live is probably like middle class-ish. And so I think it was sometime around last year in like April or May. I just remember all over social media, people talking about, toilet paper, it's all gone, all the milk, all the groceries, are gone. And my mom had to go all the way from like our nearest grocery store because everything was gone to a more wealthy, like significantly more wealthy grocery store, and they had food there, which I thought was really interesting. But yeah.
All right. Anything else? Otherwise, we're gonna move on. All right, seeing none. So this is another video. I'm not sure we have time for it, but I think I'll play it maybe at least for 5 minutes. And then if you're interested and you want to watch it later, I can tell you, or I can give you the link to it. Okay, yeah, because it's like 25 minutes long. We don't have time for all of it. But a quick synopsis, a food desert, as we mentioned, is an area with low access to healthy and affordable food. About 19 million people in America, according, actually that number is a little outdated now, it's like 23.5 million people in America live in a food desert, and it disproportionately affects Black communities. Despite nationwide efforts to improve poor food environments, many of the biggest names in America's grocery industry continue to abandon these neighborhoods. And this one talks more about, I don't know if any of you remember, I was probably too young or wasn't really paying attention, but Michelle Obama had her like Let's Move campaign, and part of that was to eradicate food deserts before like their time in office was up. And this video sort of shows the extent of like what that did and like how it like didn't go far enough and that it's still a huge problem. But we can start it for like 6 minutes and then we'll continue on.
It's Planet Fitness's best deal ever.
Oh no.
Super free. Get your first month free. No enrollment, then only $10 a month.
Your first month free, yeah.
Get moving in our clean and spacious clubs with your first month free. No enrollment, cancel anytime. This one-time deal ends May 12th.
Sorry about that.
The problem still persists today, fomented by economic and residential segregation. So why have grocery stores, big and small, remained so resistant to invest in these underserved communities?
There's increased costs for opening up a business in areas without a lot of existing investments in those communities. It's harder to secure loans, and there's higher.
Hold on, I think it started halfway through it. I'm not sure how to stop that and go back.
It's Planet Fitness's best deal ever.
Super free. Super free.
Get your first month free. No enrollment, then only $10 a month.
Your first month free, yeah.
Get moving in our clean and spacious clubs with your first month free. No enrollment, cancel anytime. This one-time deal ends May 12th.
In the midst of a worldwide pandemic and raging protests against police brutality, there's another silent crisis wreaking havoc on America's most vulnerable communities: food deserts.
I think it's to our detriment. Like, the food deserts are killing us.
If you go to the white people neighborhood, they got markets here, markets there.
Access to healthy food is a racial and health equity issue.
The USDA defines a food desert as an area where at least a third of the population lives greater than 1 mile away from a supermarket for urban areas or greater than 10 miles for rural areas. It is typically located in an area with higher levels of poverty, where residents have limited access to healthy and affordable food. And many of these families also do not own a vehicle, so getting to a well-stocked, full-service grocery store on a regular basis can be very difficult. By these metrics, about 19 million people in America live in a food desert. And Johns Hopkins research shows that food deserts disproportionately affect people of color. Food deserts can be detrimental to its residents' health. I grew up living in a food desert myself in Baltimore. There were absolutely no grocery stores, pharmacies, or retail stores within miles of the area I lived in. We either ate processed food or we bought junk food at the nearest corner store. And well, with the combination of poor diet and other factors, the people in my household had chronic illnesses, and one even passed away prematurely because of it. The term food deserts became popularized in public policy around 2010 when Michelle Obama introduced the Let's Move campaign with the goal of eliminating food deserts within 7 years. So why are some of the biggest names in America's grocery store business refusing to set up shop in communities where there's not only a dire need, but a huge consumer base?
It's hard to pinpoint exactly when and how food deserts developed, but most scholars agree that its origins can be traced back to the 1960s. Post-World War II, an increase in car production along with a housing shortage led to new developments in the suburbs. In 1956, Congress passed the National Interstate and Defense Highway Act, and the interstate system was expanded by 41,000 miles across the nation. During that time, the number of supermarkets more than doubled from 14,000 in 1950 to 33,000 in 1960. In his book, The Color of Law, author Richard Rothstein explains how discriminatory housing practices dating back to the 1930s paved the way for a phenomenon called white flight, where middle-class white families moved to suburban areas. Many businesses, including grocery stores, followed suit, while African Americans and other people of color were often left behind in underserved communities.
There's an increase in poverty in urban areas in the 1980s, with many industrial jobs leaving urban areas for rural areas and also for overseas. So these demographic shifts led to urban areas with extreme geographically concentrated social disadvantage. And in those areas of extreme geographically concentrated social disadvantage, investments are very sparse for both the public sector and the private sector.
According to the United States Department of Agriculture, there were more than 6,500 food deserts in the U.S. between 2000 and 2006, and more than 60 of those were located in urban areas. Despite decades of awareness of the disparity in Americans' access to food, the problem still persists today, fomented by economic and residential segregation. So why have grocery stores, big and small, remained so resistant to invest in these underserved communities?
There's increased costs for opening up a business in areas without a lot of existing investments in those communities. It's harder to secure loans, and there's higher insurance rates.
All right, I hate to cut it short, but you can watch the rest of the video on YouTube. Let me get back to the slides here. All right, so next we've heard a lot about the problem of food apartheid, how it's intentional, deliberately set up this way, and so now we're going to talk about what are some potential solutions to it. So first off, a simple one, well, not so simple if you don't have the land for it, which oftentimes communities who live in food apartheid don't have land. A community garden is a great way because a great start because it doesn't rely on racially discriminatory institutions or practices to cater to the needs of people in these food deserts. Another one is farmers markets. They're also great because local farmers are able to sell their produce and other products directly to people, benefiting them both by sort of cutting out the distribution and like sending it to grocery stores. It cuts out like the middle process of that, and they can sell directly. And you can also go to city council meetings and help organize or try and urge them to set up these farmers markets. I'm pretty sure the one in Santa Cruz was set up through efforts such as that. And then also we heard about that there's predatory marketing of fast food and processed food by the food industry that predominantly targets poor and Black communities, and ending that through regulations is important. Next. So another big part is understanding that food apartheid is inextricably linked to all other issues of racial inequity, namely land ownership, low economic mobility, and oppressive systems and historic policies, as they mentioned, like redlining, that trap BIPOC families in poverty. And it's also important to note that we don't live in a meritocracy, just on the merits of, what you contribute to society doesn't guarantee that you'll live, a life free of worry and that you'll have food and that kind of stuff. Because as long as the game is rigged, nothing will get better. And I just wanted to point out these two graphs. So the one on the left is a pie chart showing population by race in the United States. You can see that it's 60.1% white, 12.2% Black, 18.4% Hispanic, 5.6% Asian, and then some of them are sort of too slim to see on there, but 2.8% is multiple races, and then one of those slivers is Native Americans. And then on this graph to the right, so this graph on the right isn't the actual representation of private land ownership in the US. I had to sort of like zoom in. So this pie chart on the right shows 10% of all land in the US. And so we can see that just that 10%, 81% of it is owned by white people, 9% Black, 4% Hispanic, 1% Asian, 5% other. But the actual distribution, which, oh, shoot, oh no. There we go. This is the actual distribution. So that 10% slice of the pie I was showing you was like maybe this, just so that you can see these slivers, but this is the actual representation. 98% of all land in the United States is owned by white people, and only 0.9% is owned by Black people. So how can you, if you don't have like the land and if you don't control, like, agricultural land takes up a huge portion of US land in America. And if you don't own that land, how can you sustain your own communities? You have to basically, you're at the whims of, white landowners and agricultural giants, and they don't really have the autonomy to be self-sustaining. And until that changes, food apartheid won't change. And then also acknowledging, so any policies, so any solution to food apartheid, so any policies or system changes that promote BIPOC agency and autonomy by eliminating the wealth gap to be able to own and operate a representative proportion of the food system. So like I mentioned, if they don't have, a living wage or healthcare or, free college or lands or reparations or anything like that, then they can't really escape from this system, because, solutions to food apartheid, they have to work outside of the current food system, because relying on grocery stores, out of the goodness of their heart to move into Black neighborhoods and, support these underserved communities, that's just not going to happen. And so any solutions have to come from empowering, Black communities to be able to autonomously control their own like food production and operate and all that stuff. And then another potential solution is, so when grocery stores do leave these communities, I don't think a great solution is to like incentivize them with money to come back, because then again, you're just like incentivizing bad behavior. But instead, the government, which is something that happened in Baldwin, Florida, their last sort of grocery store closed down. And so the city opened up its own grocery store that operated in the absence of the one that left. This was the headline: when a deep red town's only grocery store closed, a city hall opened its own store. Just don't call it socialism. So the government can also step in and provide this, because the free market, their number one priority is profit, and as long as they can make more money in white neighborhoods, they're going to continue to abandon Black neighborhoods. So the government can also step in and fill that need. But yeah, that's about it. These are the sources, and thank you for being here today. If you have any questions, let me know. If you want me to go back to any slides, I can do that. Next week is going to be talking about food waste, food banks, and food insecurity, and food deserts in the context of UCSC and Santa Cruz. So stay tuned for that. There's going to be a bunch of resources, food resources as well. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you all for coming. We went a little bit over time, but I hope that's okay. And I hope you learned something.
Bijan, thank you. I learned so much in this and I really enjoyed it. It's like, seems like it took a lot of work to put together too. So.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, thank you. Very depressing, but very, very interesting. And now I'm kind of fired up to do something.
Awesome. Yeah. Hopefully that's what you leave this presentation with, some urgency. Alrighty. I'm going to stop recording.